Good morning. We're here with chapter 3 titled The Major at the Wharf from Charley Skedaddle, written by Patricia Beatty. Although he could see nothing, Charley knew when the steamer had reached her destination by her slowing and the greeting whistles blasting from other ships in the port. As the vessel prepared to dock on the fourth day of the voyage, Con Sullivan came shambling through the gloom toward him. Standing over Charley and Jem, he said, "I gotta have my jacket back now." Without getting up, Charley slid out of the too-large jacket and handed it to the man who had been so friendly to him in New York. Jim Miller asked accusingly, "What do you plan to do with this boy now that we're here, Con? You told him to come along in New York." Con shook his head. "I don't know. I was drugged that night," he grinned. "Anyhow, I got ye out of New York, Charley." Charley was too disgusted to speak, but Jem went on talking. "We saw you playing chuck luck. Got any money left to send Charley here back home on the railroad or a steamer? Or did you lose it all?" Con sat down with a sigh. "The truth is, I lost it. Lost every red cent of the bounty money. There were real gamblers aboard, and they cleaned me and some of the others out. Have you got enough, Jem, to send them home? If you do, I guess I'll have to owe you." Miller said flatly, "I never got any bounty money, and I left what money I had with my wife. What do you think will happen to Charley?" Sullivan shrugged. "He could join up here as easy as anywhere else." Jim scoffed. "He's only 12 years old, Con. The way I see it, all he can be is an officer's servant." Con shrugged again. "Well, anyway, that gets him away from the trouble he had in New York." Now Con fumbled about and took an apple from his haversack with the words, "Here's an apple for you, Charley. Maybe you shouldn't have asked to come along with us." When Charley didn't reach out for the apple, Con took a knife from his pocket, opened it, and sliced it in two. At the sight of the blade, Charley tensed. Sure as could be, it was his brother's Johnny's fine staghorn one, a Christmas gift from him and Noreen. It had gone to Gettysburg with him. Charley asked softly, "Where'd you get that knife, Con?" The man stared at it for a moment, folded it, and put it back into his trousers pocket. Then he said, "I won it shooting dice up in Pennsylvania." "It was my brother's," accused Charley. "He wouldn't gamble with it, not a Christmas gift." "Well, I won it fair and square from him," Con scowled. "But you brought back his silver watch," Con nodded. "Why shouldn't I? He said he had a pretty sister and I wanted to get a look at her. Besides, I got a gold watch of my own," he sighed. "Until yesterday, I had it." He took the knife off Johnny when he died, thought Charley, who now touched his brother's precious silver pocket watch in his left side pocket. If Johnny's watch had been a better one than Con's, it probably would not have come back to him, and Noreen either. And to think they had made so much of Sullivan, entertaining him at supper in an oyster house and holding him in high esteem, how wrong they had been about this man. Charley mumbled, "I don't want your apple. I don't want to have anything to do with you any more." Sullivan got up and began to eat the apple. As he walked away, he said over his shoulder, "Suit yourself, kid. It ain't any skin off my nose if you don't. Just don't expect me to do you no favors from now on. I don't need no Bowery brats hanging around me." "And I sure don't need you," muttered Charley under his breath. I guess it was. "And I sure don't need you. And I sure don't need you." Charley muttered Charley under his breath. He scrambled to his feet and ran after Sullivan to say, "I'm going to write my sister and tell her about you so she'll know you ain't no hero." "Go on, do it. Squawk to anybody you want to. Tell the guards how I got ye aboard here. Now that we're here, they won't care. Nobody cares about the likes of ye. We're here to fight a war, not white noses." Stung by this, Charley went back to Jem, who was now standing and getting his equipment together to leave the ship. "Can I come with you, Jem?" the boy asked. Jem's smile was melancholy. "I'm afraid you can't, Charley. We'll be marched under guard so these bounty hunters won't get the chance to run. It's daylight now, so you'd be seen if I try to hide you. You have to go off last. Then you find yourself an officer and tell him how you got here and what you were up to. Ought I tell him Con Sullivan did it? Why bother? All he has to do is say he didn't, and he'd say that too. He said nobody cared about me here. That's the truth of it, son. Charley held out his hand. Thank you for sharing your food with me and for talking to me. Maybe we'll meet up again where the 140th New York goes. Maybe so, Charley. Here's my hand on it, and good luck to you. Some minutes later, Charley heard the thud as the steamer's side met the wharf and the shouts of the deckhands as she was made fast. Almost immediately afterward, one of the guards at the bottom of the steps shouted out, "Find your regiment, stay together, and form in single file." In the confusion of the moving soldiers seeking their regimental units, Charley lost sight of Jem Miller. He stood where he was while a strong lunged guard called off the regiments by number, and they marched up the companionway. Within 10 minutes' time, Charley Quinn was the only one left in the large, murky, vile-smelling, between-decks hold that had previously contained several hundred men. He felt lost, deserted. A voice hailed him. "Who's that down there? Come here, soldier." "I ain't no soldier," cried Charley. Then he came slowly forward to face a stern-faced, gray-bearded sergeant standing at the foot of the stairs. "Who would you be?" demanded the soldier. "Charles Quinn from New York City." "I want to enlist, sir." "Enlist?" The sergeant laughed. "You came all the way to Virginia to enlist? You could have done it on Chambers Street in New York and gotten bounty money for it." He peered down through the tobacco-heavy fog. "You're mighty small, ain't you?" "Are you old enough?" "I think so," lied Charley. "I can already shoot." "Well, whatever and whoever you are, you'll be going topside with me right now. You can't stay down here," and the man grabbed Charley by the shoulder. Propelled into the deck by the sergeant, Charley found his eyes dazzled by the clear, cool morning sunshine. The freshness of the salt air made him sneeze. He looked around at the blue harbor, busy with ships of every description. Sailing ships at Wharf with naked masts bare of sails, and ships entering under full sail, paddle wheel, side wheel, and propeller steamers, rowboats, and barges. The wharves were a hive of activity. Carts and wagons took on crates, stacked up on the pier, and unloaded others, while carriages moved along them. Men, most of them in blue Yankee uniforms, pushed about, shouting and gesturing. Not far from the wharf stood a train made up of boxcars, its engine spouting steam as if it were impatient to leave. Long lines of blue-clad soldiers were heading toward the train, 2 by 2, the men who had just disembarked from the steamer. The sergeant led Charley over to a tall, black-bearded man with the straps of an officer on his shoulders. Charley did not know his rank, but did know enough to call him sir. In his hands, this officer held a board with papers on it. "Major Caswell," said the sergeant, "this is what I found below when all the troops marched off." "What is it?" "A stowaway," asked the major. "I think so." "What sort of costume is he wearing?" asked the officer, looking at Charley's Bowery Boy uniform. "Who are you? Why were you with those soldiers?" Charley took off his plug hat. The major had a heavy face and a frown to match it. "I'm Charles Quinn, sir, from New York City. This is what boys who live in the Bowery wear. I came to join the army. I want to join the 140th New York Veterans Volunteers, my brother's regiment." "Did your brother smuggle you aboard?" "No, sir. He got killed at Gettysburg at Round Top." The major's face softened now. He asked in a gentler tone, "How old are you?" Relieved that he hadn't had to explain how he really got aboard, Charley tried a bold lie. 16? "No. You're not even 14 if you're a day. You have to be a full 16 to enlist. Go back to New York." "I can't. I haven't got any money but 60 cents, sir." Over Charley's head, Major Caswell asked the sergeant, "Maybe the captain of some vessel will let him work his passage back as a cabin boy. There's nothing like an army to attract boys and dogs. On the other hand, suddenly the man looked down at Charley and asked, "Would you be Irish?" "Oh, yes, sir, I am. Most Irish can sing, can you?" Astonished, Charley only gaped at the major. What a strange question. The man went on, "Well, can you carry a tune?" Charley nodded. "The sisters wanted to make a choir boy out of me, but I wouldn't be one. They said I had a good enough soprano, but I thought I sounded like a girl." Charley thought wistfully now of his school and how he'd refused to sing in the church choir because the Bowery boys had laughed when he told them about it. Refusing the offer had made Noreen cry. He said, "I can carry a tune, sir." "If you are musically inclined, I may know what to do with you." The officer turned the pages on his board to the last sheet, nodded, and said, "The Army is often in need of musicians. There may be a place for you after all in the 1st Division. That's where your 140th New York is." Charley asked anxiously, "Do servants in the Army have to sing, sir?" This made the major laugh again. "Not necessarily, though it helps to entertain when camp life gets too dull." "Why would the Army want a singer?" Charley asked himself. Aloud, he asked, "Will I have to take men's boots off, sir?" "Not unless it suits you to do so for some officer at the headquarter company. I see by this that several regiments, including the 140th New York, are in need of a drummer." There didn't seem to be any aboard this ship, or buglers either. I had hoped there might be some musicians in this latest batch of bounty jumpers. Now, truthfully, how old are you? 12, going on 13, Charley replied, and asked hopefully, "I'm not too young to be a drummer, am I?" "No, you are the right age." Charley's heart leapt. Then he said truthfully once again, "But, sir, I don't know how to play a drum." "You will be taught, if they decide to take you on. That is not up to me to decide." "Where will I be going?" Major Caswell pointed at the train. "With them. Now get over there and get aboard." The officer motioned to a private nearby. "Private Bradley, tell the officer in charge that this boy is a new recruit of sorts." "Am I in the Army now?" Charley dared to ask. "More or less, so far as I'm concerned," replied the major, smiling down at Charley's joyful face. Consumed with a desire to hug the officer and jump up and down for happiness, Charley fought back the urge. He asked, "Do drummers and buglers get to fight?" Not one of the 3 soldiers present replied, although all 3 smiled as they looked at one another over his head. "Come along with me, boy," ordered the young private, who started off swiftly toward the waiting train, with Charley half running at his side. As they approached the train, Charley noted that each car had armed soldiers seated atop it. The door of the very last car stood open with guards in front of it. The private lifted Charley and pitched him inside. Then the door slid shut. The car was crowded with sitting and leaning soldiers who made room for him with ill grace. "My God, it's a Bowery boy," exclaimed one, a little soldier with pinched face. "What's he doing here so far from home?" Charley was proud to be recognized as being from the Bowery. As he lowered himself to the floor of the swaying, jolting car, he said, "I'm going to be a bugler or a drummer boy." "I hate buglers," came from another soldier. "They get us up in the mornings and put us to bed at night like we was mollycoddled babies." Charley looked around the thronged car for Jem Miller, but didn't see him. He would have preferred to be in Jem's car, he said. "When we stop, I'm going to get down and look for my friend's car so I can get in with him." "No, you won't," said the pinch-faced soldier. "We've all been warned. If we try to get out, we're going to get shot down." "Then guards are bound and determined that no bounty jumping goes on here," Charley asked. "Are you part of the 140th New York?" "Not us," said the soldier, who hated buglers. "All of us in here are the 11th New York Battery. We're light artillery. The 140th is infantry, foot soldiers." I'm with the 140th. "I volunteered," Charley said proudly. The little pinched-faced man guffawed. "You'd have to do that. You're too much of a sprat to be drafted. How old are you, Bowery boy? 9 or 10? "Near to 13, replied Charley angrily. "Well, if I was from the 140th, I'd send you back home to sprout up some. A bugle be almost as long as you are, and you can hardly be spotted over a drum, little feller. Charley, not liking this kind of teasing, cried hotly, Major Caswell said I was big enough. Who's Major Caswell, kid? He don't cut no ice with me. Another Yankee put in. Oh, leave him alone, Joshua. If he wants to join the army, that's his business. He'll be sorry soon enough, once he gets a taste of what it's like being ordered around all day. Let's have some music, Clem. As the soldiers began to play a harmonica, the men fell silent to listen. Charley Quinn pondered the words he had heard from the major and these soldiers. Of course, he would get a uniform. He'd seen buglers and drummers at the head of military parades in New York City. They had looked splendid, of course. He'd liked the army camp. Hadn't the major said that boys and dogs liked the army? Maybe he could get a dog of his own when they got to camp. He never owned one. It would be fine to see Jem Miller again and strut past Con Sullivan with a big dog at his heels as the drummer boy of the 140th New York. Come to think of it, there hadn't been a drummer boy in the parade. Con and Jem had marched in, just a brass band that stayed behind on the wharf when the troops boarded the steamer. Johnny's regiment would find out what a dandy soldier boy they had gotten in his fine younger brother, already a good shot and a fine fighter. As he daydreamed about his glorious future in the army, Charley listened to the quiet talk of the artilleryman standing near him, a big soldier who was putting on his briar pipe so deeply that he was wreathed in blue smoke. I got good ears, better than most, and I overheard something very interesting before we boarded. Guess who's at the town of Culpeper Courthouse, which ain't far from where we were headed at Brandy Station. Abe Lincoln? Asked another man with a sharp laugh. No, not Abe. General Meade, who with the rebels at Gettysburg. And that sure as the devil ain't all who's there right now. Who else? Asked another soldier. P.D. Parnham and all his elephants? No, not him. General Grant. Ulysses S. Grant, who's been fighting and winning in the West. He's at Culpeper, too. Now, what do you suppose it means when two big generals get their heads together in the same place? The little pinch-faced soldier who had teased Charley put in softly. I always say you can never tell which way a pickle's gonna squirt, but I'd say we're headed for a scrap. Do you suppose the Confederates know about this? Sure they know. Rebels are supposed to be right here in Virginia, too, at a place called Orange. That ain't too far from where we're bound. This is their part of the country. There's plenty of Virginia folks all around here, too. Here that are civil to us and then run with messages to that old Confederate General Robert E. Lee to tell him what we're up to. I bet when the scrap comes, he'll be ready and waiting. Charley Quinn drank up the words. A scrap. A battle. Sure, they'd been one if two famous generals were both at the same place. The pipe-smoking artilleryman went on in a deep rumble. Think you something else, too. It ain't only that them two are here together. It's coming into springtime now. That's when the fighting always starts up all over again, ain't it? That was Chapter 3. Chapter 4 coming up.